Well, welcome to session 15. Looking forward to this session. It's going to be really interesting. You know, a lot of discussion about data lakes and data warehouses, and data mesh has been going on now for some years. And, you know, here to tell us more about it and to give a clear perspective on these things is Karthik, and Karthik will introduce himself. I'll be driving some of the slide deck for him, but let me hand it right over to you, Karthik, to introduce yourself and the topic whilst I bring the slides up.
Cool. Thanks, Tarek, and I'm glad to be here, joining at the CDOIQ conference. I have attended sessions in last day or two, and lots of discussions around, as Derek said, around the data warehouse and data lake and data mesh or data products. So today I'm going to talk about all of them, and more importantly, the data strategy to drive into the aspects of data lake, data warehouse, and data mesh. We often find challenging for organizations to navigate through that path. So this presentation is intended to help navigation and find their way through. My name is Karthik Murugan. I head up the data analytics division for Amazon Web Services for Asia Pacific market, and glad to be here and joining it. So if you can start, Derek, on to the next slide. We do find that data growth is remarkable. You know, 90% of the data today has been created in just last 2 years. So you can imagine how much more is there to come with, especially the conversations like Gen AI and others that is coming on the way. We find that the volume of data is going to explode. And if you look at the next slide on driving the value from the data, only 32% of the companies have reported in a recent Accenture study where they have looked at only 32% companies being able to realize the value. So we all been in the data conference here. Data is important aspect. The data volume is growing, but only 32% have been able to realize the value. And more astonishing fact on the next slide is data is imperative, but there is a gap. Data-driven organizations are growing at 30+%, and 68% of the organizations reported they're still unable to realize the value. And only 28% of the survey responded have a data strategy in place, which is an alarming fact and the data points to look at, given how important the data is and the outcome and the value that organizations constantly strive to get from the data aspect. So with these data points in hand, if you look at the next slide, we want to build a scalable data strategy. So what it means is we know the technology is changing. The methodologies of achieving the outcomes are changing. Data warehouses are coming through, and lakes and data mesh and Gen AI and more in future. That could be something else. So it's important that the data strategy is built with a strong foundation because the strategy is going to be something that is going to stick with you and your organization and should be able to accommodate and be adaptable to the new technology changes that's coming in its way. So on the next slide, if we see what the data strategy would look at, within AWS, we work with a number of organizations, and we defined it a modern data strategy. What it means is a plan to align for actions using people, process, and technology and mindset. You know, we've always heard how important people, process, and technology is, but there's an additional component of the mindset, and which is the aspect of driving that cultural aspect within the organization. And an agile plan to drive those 4 things together in accelerating a direct support for your strategic business outcomes. We've seen organizations often define the data strategies, but there tends to be a gap between the data strategy and the organization strategy. So it's important aspect to ensure that whatever your strategic business objectives are, and what are the data strategies that's going to be aligned with those business objectives, right? So with that, so how do we define those business strategies? So on the next slide, if we look at the mechanism that we have defined, what we call is the data-driven organizations. Now, we've had and heard from a lot of CDOs and data leaders in the last 2 days about trying to build that data-driven organization culture. And that's the cultural aspect of it. So if you see the people, process, technology as the core component in the middle, but also you have the cultural aspect, and how do you combine those cultural aspects that we have started in the previous slides that we have seen, is through this mechanism, what we call as the data flywheel. So data flywheel is a mechanism that Amazon has used to build its business model and grow its business model in driving that flywheel. We have taken that same philosophy and applied that to the data strategy aspect, so that organizations can harness the value of data with a sustained innovation. And the key word here is the sustained innovation, because the technology will keep on changing. How do you ensure that you drive that sustained innovation within the organization? So with people, process, and technology in the middle, you start with data as a product and start to continue and deliver that value and get a constant feedback loop. Now, to drive that innovation, those cyclic loop has to be broken in by experimentations that would develop into a new product or a new service as a data, using data as an asset. So we really are talking about looking at building that data strategy, building that data product and data services by experimentations through people and process technology as a core component, and taking that constant feedback loop so that your organizations can constantly innovate and constantly improve on an ongoing basis. Now, what we see with the data-driven organization are some key characteristics that resonate. So if Derek, you look on some of those key characteristics will keep coming up. The key characteristic starts up with, on the next slide, is, so the first key characteristics that we look at is to start and think big, right? And this really, there are 6 key characteristics, and we'll start looking at one by one. The key think big goal is effectively to look at organizations who are starting their journey, but they want to be a customer-centric organization or a product-centric organization or innovative organization, or in a public sector space, more to drive that citizen experience organization. So you really have to think it from a think big goal so that you can start something small, but also get onto the path of thinking big. The next characteristics that we look at is to focus on delivering the business priorities fast, right? Given the rate of technology changes that is coming through, it is important to ensure those business priorities are constantly validated and ensure that your return on investment is of high value. Because if you're embarking on a journey of building a data solutions or data platforms for a year or so, or it's a large program of work that continues to last for 5 years or 3 years, I think in one of the sessions yesterday, we were talking about the data warehouse migrations that lasted for a number of years and are still going on. So it's important to look at how those business priorities can be delivered in a more meaningful way, either using the smallest piece of technology or smallest framework. The next key characteristic that we see within the organization that succeed in driving that data-driven organization is they share a leadership connection between business and technology data ownership. So the business and technology community really comes together and they understand the value of the data The technology aspect of the business of the organizations focused on enabling the data platforms that can ensure that as the data volume comes through or the different types of data comes through, the data governance and data quality is maintained. And the business aspect really looks at ensuring that the consumer and the producers of the data are tightly linked with the trusted data capabilities. And the next characteristics that we look at within the organization is to ensure the strong collaborations. So the technology actually acts as a strong collaborator in ensuring the agility and delivering those data products. This is linking back to those business priorities and ensuring that prioritization is fast and quick. So the collaboration between the business community and the technology community is important. The fifth key characteristics that we look at is ensuring that upskilling and empowering of the producers and consumers. We did talk about consumers and producers, which we will dive deep into the next few slides. But what it means is the producers and consumers, whether it's technology or whether it's analytical tools, they are constantly upskilled with the new technologies that's coming up in the landscape or in the environment, so that they can constantly focus on ensuring and delivering the value. So things like Gen AI starts to come in. How do you upskill them? How do you ensure that you reap the benefit from those new technologies available? And the last one that we look at is the security aspect of it. Last but not least, it's an important aspect to ensure that within the organizations we keep the data secure and governed. As the systems get federated, we see over a period of time, and more systems will come and make its way into the organization for a very valid and the business purposes. Now, we drive that privacy and governance across the federated systems. Now, these are the key characteristics that we look at within the organizations. Now, let's look at how you can start building those data strategies using those key characteristics on the next slide. Right now, we realize that every organization is in different journey path. Some organizations would be quite advanced in driving the monetization. Some are just starting the journey with the reporting capabilities, and they're constantly, or some organizations constantly looking at ETL tools to extract, transform, and load the data across different systems and bring the silos together. Or you might be looking at the real-time analytics outcomes. Now, the important aspect of the data strategy is, and also to be mindful of those data-driven organizations, is irrespective of where you are in the journey, the data strategy should support or should enable you to achieve the outcomes, whether you want to be in the monetization space or real-time analytics or in the ETL or just doing the reporting. It can be all of them, and it doesn't have to be at the sequence. We constantly find that organizations are trying to monetize the data while they're constantly looking at reporting capabilities. So that's the data strategy that would or should help you to deliver those outcomes irrespective of where you're of the journey. Right. On the next slide, if you look at some of the data-driven outcomes, right? So if you look at, from example, healthcare and life science, there are organizations trying to look at, improving patient outcome or looking at, personalized population health kind of activities. And the other health sectors, on the other education sectors, we look at accelerating the content creations and also looking at the smart campus capability across the education institute, and to ensure that drive the student outcome. If you look at in some financial space, transaction fraud, compliance, and also risk assessment and management, these are some of the key outcomes that we see across the different industries. If you look at government, looking at citizen outcome, open data platforms are becoming a key aspect of it. And lastly, if you look at the utility space or other industry looking at predictive analytics, now all of these outcomes are important. We talked about the data-driven organization. We looked at some of the key characteristics. We looked at where the organizations can be in the journey. Now, the important aspect is, irrespective of which industry sector you're from, it's important to work backwards from those outcomes. You might be able to drive that healthcare and life science. You might be able to drive finance, government, or utilities, but it's important the specific outcomes that you want to drive it. And all of that is underpinned by governance, security, and return on investment to drive that innovation. So data becomes a key component. You constantly focus on driving those outcomes. So this is where we were talking about how to ensure that your business strategies and data strategies are linked. So you have these business strategies of the outcomes you want to drive and build that capabilities. Now, if we look at the data platform journey, now I want to touch on the technical aspect of it now, right? So if you look in the next slide, the data has evolved over a period of time. If you go one more slide, the AI, ML, and DevOps should come up, where we look at how data platform has evolved. Now, back in the days before 2000, there were like DBAES, where we had lots of databases, and then evolved into a big data platform where the volume of data started to increase. We were talking about 3 Vs: velocity, volume, and veracity of the data. And then the fast data era started to come in, where the need to do some real-time analytics was important. And then we talked about AI, ML started to make its way from its predictive analytics. People were still doing some analytics, taking the retrospective data and using building models at scale and driving that AI, ML. But once they realized then that AI, ML needs to be constantly maintained, there was a need for data ops kind of mechanism, where a constant maintaining of the machine learning models or implementation of those models in the production environment was needed. And then we look at the modern data. Modern data effectively was looking at able to share the data effectively and able to look at the need for unified governance across the data platforms and data systems. Also looking at how to ensure all the services will come together to drive that outcome. And now we're talking about Gen AI, and beyond that, I don't know what's that going to be beyond that, but data is the key foundation. The reason I'm highlighting this slide is it's always important to look at where you are in this journey and how your data strategy is impacting as the evolution of the data platforms are going, because there is more to come. And irrespective of where you're in the journey, the modern data strategy should be enabling and linking it from your previous investments. So if you have a database, you just can't ignore them. There is a lot of intellectual properties, lots of legacy that has built over decades or so. So it's important to leverage on those investments and bring their value and bring the outcome back to the strategies that your business is aiming for. And then if you look at a little bit deeper on the next slides of how those evolution of data platform happens, we started with data warehouse. The reason why data warehouse came into picture was we were largely dealing with structured data. There were source data systems, and they were all like ETL, and organizations was wanting to build a consolidated view of those multiple source systems. And they typically will embark on a large number of months or a years long program where they will bring in the data from multiple sources into a single data warehouse and build reports on top of that. On the next slide, if you look at the challenges with the data warehouse, what it was structured, semi-structured. Sometimes, some raw data were built. They will have, a landing area within the data warehouse, or the golden record, or the consumer data marts that was done. They were designed for low-cost storage. There was to some extent they were used by data scientists, but not really in a huge exploited manner of getting the value out of data. Data storage started to become very tightly coupled. Anytime a change needs to happen, the source system then needs to do a lot of impact analysis. I still remember in the days when I was working with an organization, financial institute, they say of introducing a new product and services. Introduction of the products and services was some much simpler exercise than making a change in data warehouse. And that change in data warehouse will typically take more than 60% of the initiative, and that limited organizations to launch new services and products. No differential SLAs, there would be batch process running overnight, and there's always a fight for compute. There was low flexibility on making the change. Now, then we launched on from a data warehouse. We launched onto the era of data lake. Now, organizations started seeing that, oh, my data is now changing. It's no longer just structured data. I'm getting semi-structured and unstructured data starting to come in. And then the concept of data lake starts to come in, where they said, let's bring in data from all the different sources, let's dump in, and then we can try to find out where we can get the value, right? But as you can, the important thing to consider is there still existed the data warehouse. The legacies or the previous investment did not go away. So data, and this is why I said it's important to ensure that your modern data strategy continues to leverage on the investments, what has happened in past. So data warehouse and data lake started to coexist. The difference was the organizations was trying to tap some part of the business unit within the organization will tap straight into the data lake for some machine learning attributes and machine learning capabilities. Data analyst will combine data from data warehouse, and they will pull the data from data lake, and the reports were still siloed on its own, where they were largely relying on data warehouse. There was still an ETL component that will take the data from a data lake into a data warehouse. Now, if you look at next in terms of where the challenges in the data lake comes in is it builds over a period of time. So if we keep going on, it should build a picture. There will be multiple stream of data coming in. The challenge was the ingestion, building a reliable data ingestions and pipeline. We had a challenge of data management because the pipelines were getting too complex. And the security and the governance was incredibly difficult because the volume of data was just growing dramatically, and there was no data cataloging available across all the different data that was coming in. It did enable the capability across the organizations because they were able to bring in data from every different angle. But there were a number of other challenges that kind of came along with it. Data sharing became a challenge. How effectively the duplication of data was happening quite a lot. Now, once these challenges were starting seeing, then the next thing that came along in our journey, if in the next slide we see, is the evolution of those data lakes then baked into a data lakehouse. Now, what data lakehouse was trying to attempt to solve for is to avoid that duplication, avoid that inefficiencies, start to build some data governance in a unified manner, to build a bit of control across the data warehouse systems and the data lake. So as you can see here, those data warehouse systems and data lake will start to become very coherently exist within your data platform. Your BI reports were starting to leverage your data in the lake and in the data warehouse, where previously were just relying on the data warehouse. Machine learning end users and the data scientists were starting to leverage the data in the combined manner between the data warehouse and data lakes. So the lakehouse promise was to combine and avoid those duplications together. But if you look at the next slide in the data lakehouse motivations, it established a coherent responsibility and ownership and ingestion of the sources. It can land, if you've got a structured data, that the data ingestion will land into the data warehouse. And if there are quality issues and stuff, the citizens will generate a trust on the system because the data, they know where the data is landing in the data warehouse or is in the data lake where they're consuming it from. There was a little bit of data silos starting to get built up over time because within the lake, there still had a mechanism of the data started to grow highly. So while the data warehouse didn't have the data silos, data lake continued to have those silos aspect. Now, if you look beyond those data warehouse lake and data lakehouse, we now starting to look at the modern data strategies and modern data platforms. So if you look at the next slide of what those modern data platforms and the lakehouse benefit we touched on, because it started to bring on the different types of data, the modern data platform we're starting to look at driving the capabilities across these different silos. There was different data silos that were coming across from the lake and the warehouse. Driving the insight was still very hard. There were people silos that is getting built. Legacy cost was increasing because as the journey of the data insight was starting getting created, lots of duplications were coming across. So all of these were still creating problem for organizations to get the insights in a meaningful manner and to drive the value, right? So for that purpose, we had to look at the cloud for modernizations. So there was some on-premises data that we're looking at. And if you look at in modernization, we look at in different phases. So if you keep looking at it, Derek, on the slides, the first phase we looked at is around building the data uplift. So organizations starting to look at move and lift and shift. And then they start to look at move into managed databases or data platforms. Then they start to look at some transformations. Say, I've got some legacy code. I need to modify and transform the data. And lastly, they will look at purpose-built services, whether they want to do NoSQL databases or SQL databases. Now, depending on which path the organizations go with, we typically see the more they go towards the modernization aspect, the total cost of ownership starts to go down and the velocity of innovation starts to bring in, because that enables, and this is also one of the topics that came earlier this morning, is you should enable your team, empower your team to what they're good at. Data scientists should be doing data science work, data engineers should be doing data engineering work, and the way it helps the team to be more empowered and more focused on their individual tasks is when they look at these purpose-built services which are designed to do the machine learning better, which are designed to do data engineering better, which are designed to handle your NoSQL or a SQL or structured or semi-structured databases. So the more and more we saw the modernization of these platforms and the purpose-built services, the more and more benefit we notice within the customers. So on the next slide, if we look at what this modern data architecture effectively looks like, is a decoupled microservices architectures. We've heard about this microservices architecture at the application layer. Now we start to see the same concept across into the data aspect. So you still have databases, business logics in the presentation layer, but those data components are now sitting in your purpose-built services that enables and gives the flexibility within the organization to either scale and use the services for their need, right? These services, whether it could be, as we said, it could be a NoSQL database or a big database or data warehouse. So we've seen the journey of how the data platform has evolved. We've seen how data warehouse to data lake and lake house. These services are purpose built to leverage on your previous investment, but also to start enabling you for the future technologies. So data warehouse can continue to exist. As the NoSQL demand come in, you have a NoSQL database and start to bring in into the data platforms. Now you use those data platform databases like NoSQL databases. You build your business logic and then you present it. What it gives you is a complete decoupled architecture, decoupled solution, and helps you to scale and helps you to adapt new business use cases at the pace your organization wants to. So this is where your technology is truly becoming an enabler and truly empowering your teams to best use their skill set of what they're good at it, whether they are data engineers or data scientists. And at the end, as a consumer, you're still looking at those outcomes by industry. So, for example, what we've seen is from personalization of the students, or whether it is predictive analytics in utilities or citizen outcomes. So that's where this architecture actually gels together in a decoupled mechanism and helps you to build that in a very incremental fashion. Now, if we, in the next slides, we will start looking at how AWS is enabling these things with the modern data strategy. So we see three key aspects here. So if you click on those ones, is modernization, unification, and the innovation. And irrespective of where you are in your journey. So if you remember the slides that we've seen earlier around the sequential path, typically we see data monetization as the last bit, or innovation as the last bit, and organization sales saying that I'm doing the modernization of my legacy applications. What the modern data strategy enables is to drive any of those three together, irrespective of where you're at in your journey, right? So you should be able to modernize your applications from your legacy to modern applications, unification of the data. If you have data silos within the organization, they should be able to be combined together to drive that outcome. From an innovation perspective, you should be able to leverage on machine learning and Gen AI capabilities to drive that outcome. And in an effect, you should be able to start anywhere, right? Because you're doing the modernization, it should not stop you to do innovation. Because you're doing, bring the data together in a data warehouse or in a data lake, it should not stop your modernization aspect. So what we have built as a technology architecture, technology platform is enabling organizations to basically drive any of these three aspects in parallel, in concurrent manner, without having to throw away your previous investments and incrementally build that over a period of time. So in the next slide, what this translates into is your different databases or different solutions or platforms, as we have seen, data warehouses and lakes and reporting solutions, machine learning. Each of these services should be able to talk to each other so that you can effectively use the data as the new data sources starts to come in. So if you are modernizing an application and bringing into a new modern database, or you're saying that I will have a machine learning initiative that we are driving that, each of these initiatives should coexist with each other and drive that people, process, and outcome. So that truly is what the modern data strategy is enabled for, right? Now, if we look at in the next slide is how those key components brings and evolves together, right? So this is where we have seen how the data journey has evolved over a period of time. We started with the data warehouse and we started with the data lake. And now we're starting to look at the modern data platforms. So modern data platform is effectively leveraging on your previous investments of your data warehouse and data lakes, bringing in new capabilities within the organizations without impacting the legacy and disruptive into the business of operations, but also making use of the data more effective manner. So your relational database, which you have had for a decade or so, should be able to connect with your big data processing engine. If you have data observability, again, you've heard in a number of sessions yesterday and today, you should be able to connect across your data platforms, whether it's data warehouse or data lake. Machine learning, as you start to get into AI, ML, and also into Gen AI, they should be able to leverage the data which is sitting in your lake, the data that is sitting in your relational database or non-relational database. So this modern data strategy connectors that we have built across different services actually enables leveraging those data capability. And then we also have that unified pane of glass that acts as a security and governance mechanism across these platforms. Now, once you got those modern data strategy, now we look at what's next beyond, right? Now we start to look at data as a product, right? So, and data mesh. Now, if you look at what that means, is you've got one business community, let's say an example of your finance or HR within an organization, and they got a modern data platform, and they probably need just the big data processing engine and also just the machine learning capabilities. And that could be their own platform. And the consumer side of things is, you've got end consumer, end user who wants to consume that data, right? Now, the data platform, what it should enable is to drive that consumer needs and help consumer whatever the consumer wants from it, but also in incremental fashion. So this modern data strategy becomes a foundational aspect of in building that data mesh kind of capability as more and more business consumers starts to look at. So it provides the capability of modern data community with joining the producers and consumers together. So if you look at Derek, if you click one more time, you should be able to see that whoever wants to produce the data and whoever wants to consume the data, they just use this modern data platform to look at it. We use this in Amazon quite a lot. We started with books division. We've got different merchants consuming. We've got the payment systems and payment teams that are wanting to consume those books information to make better decisions. But what happens in future if your business starts to grow into a number of different units within different products and consumables and also electronics and other things, right? So those data producers, as starts to come more and more into the organization, modern data platform enables and builds that capability as the team grows in. And they should be able to drive that outcome without having the need to duplicate it. And that's where the key aspect of modern data platform comes in. In the next slide, if we look at what that actually means, is each of these modern data platforms, data lakes and log analytics that we have seen is interconnected to each other. So each of these square blocks on the right can be a business unit on its own, or could be an external entity or internal entity on your organization. And they can have their own modern data platform and deliver the value. In the next slide, you can see how that actually works. So data mesh in a domain-specific manner is a line of business A, B, and C. We use AWS Lake Formation or AWS Glue as a service that combines these different business units together and build a true data product capability across the organization. It's a decentralized data domains in a federated governance manner, and also giving each of these business units a self-service capability, right? Now, if you look at in the next slide, the modern data architecture further accelerates the data-driven outcomes. Now, we've seen about the data-driven organizations, and we constantly embark on the journey. How do we drive that outcome across the organizations? Now, we've seen how the data journey has evolved from warehouse lake, and we also now seen how modern data platform with the capability of connecting the services together builds a strong foundation for your data mesh. But how do you accelerate the outcomes? So you've got all the capability, you've got all the platforms. What are the key characteristics that you look to accelerate the outcome? And we came up with 6 key characteristics that helps to drive that outcome. One is governance of the data. And we realized that organizations grows in, new systems will come in. The governance of data across federated systems is important. self-service analytics to increase the adoption in the business users. The business users are constantly asking for capability where they can service their needs by themselves and not have to depend on the technology and being a roadblock. Rich analytics and data science, machine learning is going to be the key core component in driving the outcomes and modernization aspect. It's just going to be here forever. We've seen that with AI ML and now with Gen AI, and more as the technology matures in the machine learning and AI aspect, the analytics value also will increase. Zero ETL integrations, seamless data movements. We've seen different data capabilities like big data and machine learning, and we've seen all of those SQL and NoSQL database. There is a need to have the data effectively utilized without having the need to ETLs. That's where the modern data platform's core power comes from, where they can look at seamless of data moments, making the data share easy across the data mesh architecture. As your business unit starts to grow, how you can make sure that data doesn't duplicate. Price to performance value is the most and last most important thing, is that as your data and ecosystem will start to grow, the first slide you've seen, the volume of data that has grown in just 2 years is 90% of the data that has come from. And there's more and more data that's going to be growing. So it's important that you don't blow the budget in expanding and building solutions. And these key characteristics, we look at some of these ones with 1 or 2 examples in the next slides, where we look at federated governed data, right? So in the next slide, if you look at in your federated governed model, now this is how the technology aspect is being built. So for example, if your consumer A and the business unit have a need for a data warehouse and big data and also the query engine, and the second business unit will have a need for your reporting solution or big data or doing machine learning capabilities. All of these consumers are using a siloed lake, right? So you've seen how the data journey, and we ended up with the siloed data lake. But those siloed data lakes can be brought together in a more meaningful and effective in a federated governance model. We got a service called AWS Lake Formation that enables to build that capability where you use that single pane of glass across the different consumers and bring those data together in a more meaningful manner, right? And if we look at the next aspect of the architecture is self-service analytics. Now, self-service analytics is predominantly what it means is building the serverless capability, which means moving from idea to deployment faster. You have to adapt that at scale. You have to lower the cost and build better applications easier for your business users. How does technology differentiates and brings and enables that capability? We look at in the serverless data services. So within Amazon, we built these serverless data services that gives that undifferentiated heavy lifting that typically organizations spend a lot of time. And this is, again, I touched on the point that your teams are empowered to do something better and best. And these capabilities of serverless actually enables your team to focus on the right thing and not spend too much time in ensuring that you build up an infrastructure, you're trying to join the dots together. In the next aspect, we look at the rich analytics capability, our data science and machine learning. Now, what it means is that we bring the machine learning closer to where the data is. Previously, we don't see machine learning as a separate component. It's now tightly integrated with your databases, like Amazon Aurora, which is like your online OLTP databases, or you look at your graph databases. All of these data services now have the machine learning capability. We've got ML capability built in the reporting and also in QuickSight, which is also a reporting tool. So you see how the different databases, data warehouse, and lake, and the reporting tool starts to leverage more and more of those machine learning capabilities. If you look at the zero ETL integration aspect of it, the seamless movement of the data, um, as soon as the data lands from your source systems, it should be available to your end users at different services in a very seamless manner. We building the capabilities to move that data seamlessly across without having to do the ETL aspect. It will basically load the data in your systems as the new data starts to come in from each of the systems. And at the left, you see, databases, SaaS applications, third party, and media. And those data sources are only going to grow more and more. So these capabilities of zero ETL, where we spend a lot of time in moving the data from source to target, lots of reconciliation and testing efforts get spent on, all of that goes away, and your data platform becomes more efficient, and the data consumers starts to realize the value quickly. In the next aspect, we're looking at the data sharing easy. Within AWS, we've got the capability from a data warehouse, and we've got the data exchange, which is like a marketplace environment, and combining the data exchange and your data warehouse, we're looking at no more extract, transform, and load need, right? Now you can share the data very easily from the data warehouse in your data marketplace as soon as the data is available in the data warehouse. So the whole ETL component goes away. And you don't have to worry about moving the data. And because one of the key aspects that data sharing was difficult was because organizations were looking at, once the data moves out of their organization, you don't know what the end consumers are going to use the data for. There's always a challenge in losing the power, right? So, and there's always a challenge in leakage of the data. So all of those goes away with no more ETL across the data sharing. In the next aspect, we look at building modern data to generative AI. Gen AI is such a hot topic, and I can't end this session without having to talk about the generative AI. Machine learning is at an inflection point. We just had yesterday a large language model version 2 come in with 70 billion parameters that can be tested on. It's a key driver in increased capacity of data growth and model sophistication, and it's just the start. The generative AI, as it ramps us, the art of possibility keeps on growing. The productivity and chatbot, summarization of the text, capability to search across different components, code generation, ability to build codes. I think earlier in the afternoon, we were at the panel discussion, and someone mentioned, we have a code generation capability for SQL. I don't need to learn SQL, it can be generated. Image generation, we've seen that in a creative manner. Again, there is a whole lot of different topic that we can talk for an hour about being AI responsible and ethics of it. But these are some of the capabilities that is available and starting to come into market, from image classification and the music generation. So more creative automation capabilities are starting to get. Now, what you need to get a business value quickly from generative AI is it should be easy to use, should be cost effective, and faster time to value. The base foundation models are available. It's a good head start. It's built a strong foundation, but it's also important to ensure that you start to deliver the value, because each of these business will have to be customized. There should be specific prompts that needs to be built. The volume of data as it goes, you need to ensure that it doesn't explode, and you have to have a close control of your infrastructures, because there are large GPU chips and processing power that could be consumed around it. Faster time to value is the large language models are going to come very fast and very rapid. And these foundation technology capabilities that you have within the organization should enable you to prepare for more large language model that is on its way. If you look at within AWS, what generative AI services we've got AWS Code Whisperer that helps to drive that code building aspect of it. And also look at Amazon Bedrock. Amazon Bedrock brings in the capability of the large language models. So the large language models that is available in the market, it can be built in using Amazon Bedrock. You can have APIs to access those large language models. Within AWS, we've got a number of partners who provide those large language models. And we strongly believe that one large language model may not necessarily be able to address all your needs. And there are specific language models that are going to be good at either in your text, automation capabilities, your generative AI on the image, and also looking at the end-to-end of pictures or videos and stuff. So each of these language models are going to have that capability. So that's where Amazon Bedrock comes in to leverage the best of the large language models that is available. SageMaker, leveraging on your AI ML capabilities, how you can explore that, building the transparency, because once you got those large language models, you still need to be having that AI ethics and build that explainability of how the derivation is being done. So that's where the SageMakers, some of the explainability capability are starting to come in to ensure that you have the transparency of what is happening. In terms of infrastructure, these Gen AI are going to be very high compute consumption heavy. We built AWS Trainium and Inferentia, which are very specifically designed for Gen AI capabilities to drive the outcome and to ensure that leverage the infrastructure at best of its price performance. And I just want to close in this, and this is the only slide, suppose I think we're putting in from an AWS lens perspective in the different services we've seen from end to end. The different data source starts to come in. You've got to store, query, integrate, and act on this. Again, this is what your different services will kind of come together. You've got databases like Amazon Aurora and Kinesis for streaming the data into it. You've got data lake using Amazon S3 and Redshift for the data warehouse, and integration bit comes in with AWS Glue. You've got QuickSight to deliver that reporting capability, EMR for the big data processing. We're looking at SageMaker for data science capability that I've touched earlier. And that picture that we've seen where we look at the modern data circular capability, data source coming into that modern data platform, and then producing the people, process, and applications in a very iterative and cyclic manner. You can pick and choose any of these services as per your need, scale them at your need, build an incremental fashion, and a business unit can pick within different business unit. You can pick one of those two services. There is no limitation, giving you the complete flexibility and building the outcome in your strategic need. Your data strategy can evolve as your business need evolves, as the technology evolves. And all of that is underpinned by a catalog and governance using services like AWS Lake Formation and Amazon Data Zone. So that's, I think, is the last slide, if I'm not wrong. It's the next one more slide, I think.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it at this time. Maybe it's a good segue into some of the questions that come up. So let me stop sharing real quick here, if I can find the right button to push. There you go. All right. Karthik, thank you. I think that was a really comprehensive picture that you painted for us. And now into some of the questions here. I think, one of them that I'd like to maybe start off with is looking at your slide on evolution of data platforms. it would appear that all the problems were solved before 2023, while to do any AI, you still need governed, reliable data and data ops to build value. Would you agree with that?
So the data ops challenges starts to come in when organizations starts to build at the AI ML capability, and they realize that now they have to do some data engineering, data processing, and build the models. And the challenge then come is, okay, now business dynamics are changing. My business landscape are changing. The data is not in the same form. The buying patterns of customers are changing. We are looking at different economic conditions. So how do you scale that? How do you accommodate for the change that is coming through? And that's where really the data ops kind of capabilities start to look at, okay, I want to automate this. I mean, people are still doing those capabilities, but it was very manual exercise. So what data ops starts to bring in is the automating the end-to-end capability.
Mm-hmm. Right. Another question is, are there specific large language models that are trained to help with SQL code generation?
There are specific language models that are coming in that helps with not only SQL, but any kind of natural language processing and the code generations, right? Now we're starting to see some specific models that are coming into either generating SQL or writing Python codes, but there are going to be more language models that is still very early days, I think. There's going to be a lot of more maturity that is required with the large language models in generating code in a very sophisticated manner to drive new technologies. If you are doing mobile apps development, or if you're doing a specialized applications for e-commerce, or if you're doing applications for network engineering. For those kind of capabilities, there are still a gap in the large language models on what they can and capability to do. But the basic foundations are now available using our services like Code Whisperer, where if someone wants to write a Java code or doing any application development, they can leverage that capability. There's more work to be done. If someone says, I want to build a data lake, I want to build a data warehouse, I think the large language models will evolve over a period of time to make that build process of data pipelines, the data warehouse and data lake much easier. Specific to the ecosystems or the technology that they have. We realize there's a lot of different technology vendors out there. For each of these vendors, there might be specific languages they use. So the large language will evolve to be adapted for those.
Okay, very good, very good. Well, there are some other questions out there, but we're running out of time rapidly here. We only have less than a minute. Well, actually, we don't have any more time. It's in past right now. So, there's obviously a lot of interest in this topic. And, certainly for the audience, please keep your questions coming in, because Karthik has access to all of them, and he can certainly hop in and provide replies, after the end of the session. So thank you for your participation and your questions. And Karthik, thank you for, once again, a really comprehensive picture that you painted for us, and for the interaction on the questions as well. So all the best for the future.
Thank you.